On November 22nd, 1924, one of America's most prestigious football games was being played at Harvard Stadium. However, the 30,000 people sitting in the stands had no idea they would witness an unprecedented mob assassination that day. How did Boston's most dangerous gang dare to commit murder so brazenly at this game watched by the children of high society's most distinguished families?
The last breaths of autumn were scattering the golden yellow leaves falling from the oak trees around Harvard Stadium in the cold wind. November 22nd, 1924, Saturday morning. It was the day of the Harvard-Yale game, America's most established university rivalry. In the magnificent mansions of Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, families were preparing their children for the game. Luxury automobiles were parked on the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill, in the tents set up around Harvard Stadium. New England's wealthiest families were having their traditional pre-game picnics. Champagne was being poured from crystal glasses. Sandwiches served on silver trays were being shared. This was not just a football game. This was the annual gathering ritual of the American upper class. However, just a few miles away from the stadium, in the dark streets of North End, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Vincent "Vinny" Torino, leader of the Gasoline Alley Gang, was reviewing final plans with his 4 men in the basement of an old marine shop. Vinny was a 30-year-old son of an Italian immigrant with hard facial features and a scar on his right cheek from childhood. He had grown up in Boston's Italian neighborhood, joined street gangs at 15, and committed his first murder before reaching 20. Today is not just business day, it's revenge day, Vinny muttered, while checking his Smith & Wesson pistol. The men standing before him, Tony Fast Hand Marcello, a young but ruthless gunman, Frank Silent Frank O'Malley, the gang's best marksman, and his brother Mike Torino, Vinny's right-hand man, all appeared equally determined. The reason for this revenge dated back 3 weeks. The Gasoline Alley Gang's bootlegging operation had been raided by a group belonging to the Irish War Veterans Association. Their largest warehouse burned, 3 of their men killed. They were certain Paddy Sullivan was behind this attack. Sullivan was a 23-year-old young man from one of Boston's wealthiest families, studying at Harvard University, while secretly financing Irish gangs. Paddy Sullivan was getting ready in his luxury apartment in Harvard Yard that morning, unaware of the approaching danger. The tall, brown-haired, blue-eyed, handsome young man was taking full advantage of his father owning one of Boston's largest construction companies. During the day, he took business classes at Harvard, and at night he ran bootlegging operations in Back Bay speakeasy. Today is going to be a great day, Paddy thought, while tying his silk tie. He looked at himself in the mirror. Dark blue suit, shiny shoes, his watch's gold chain. He looked perfect. He would watch the game with his fiancée Margaret Wellington in his family's private box. Margaret was the only daughter of the Wellington family, one of Boston's most established families, a blonde-haired, green-eyed young woman who was the epitome of elegance. As the clock approached 12 noon, the crowd around Harvard Stadium began to thicken. The 30,000-seat stadium was packed. Harvard's red flags and Yale's blue flags were waving in the stands. Marching bands were preparing. Cheerleaders were doing final rehearsals. The 4 members of the Gasoline Alley Gang approached the stadium at 12:30. They wore normal-looking suits, wore hats, and looked just like other spectators. Only the guns they hid under their jackets distinguished them from others. Vinny's plan was simple. They would find Sullivan and finish the job during the game when the crowd's attention was on the field. Margaret Wellington was wearing a long pink cotton dress that day, her hair styled in wavy fashion, according to the period's trend. As she entered the stadium on Paddy's arm, she noticed all eyes were on them. They were Boston's golden children, young, beautiful, wealthy, and with bright futures. "Paddy, you look very tense today," Margaret said, squeezing her fiancé's arm. "It's just a game, isn't it?" Paddy smiled, but there was uneasiness inside him. He had been receiving strange phone calls lately, threatening messages. Maybe he had taken too many risks. But it was too late now. His deal with the Irish gangs had to continue. The game started at 1:30. The massive stands of Harvard Stadium were making such noise that it could be heard from miles away. Thousands of voices shouting Harvard, Harvard, Harvard were shaking the autumn air. Yale fans were not far behind. Bula bula jale, Yale. The first half ended 2-1 in favor of Yale. Harvard fans were demoralized. Yale fans went to the locker rooms in high spirits. Meanwhile, Vinnie Torino and his men had located Sullivan's position. He was sitting in the 32nd row of the west stands, in the 5th box. During halftime, hot chocolate and sandwiches were being sold at the stands around the stadium. Paddy went to get hot chocolate for Margaret. While walking through the crowd, he felt he was being watched from behind. When he turned around, a stern-looking man he did not recognize was staring at him. His heart raced. "It's okay, I'm just being paranoid," he thought to himself. But he moved his hand to the inside pocket of his jacket, checking the small Derringer pistol he carried there. The second half began with Harvard's attack. In the 34th minute, Harvard equalized. The stadium went wild. Right at that moment, Vinnie Torino made his move. Frank O'Malley and Tony Marcello positioned themselves on both sides of Sullivan's box. Vinnie and his brother Mike headed directly for the target. The noise of the stadium was so loud that everyone was focused on the game. No one noticed the four men moving systematically. Around 3:45, Harvard scored the winning goal. The stadium rose to its feet. Thousands of people were screaming with joy. Right at that moment, Vinnie Torino approached behind Patrick Sullivan. "Paddy Sullivan," he said in a cold voice. Paddy turned around. The moment he saw Vinnie's face, he understood everything. But it was too late. "This is for our brothers," Vinnie said, drawing his gun. Margaret Wellington was sitting next to her fiancé, celebrating Harvard's victory. Right then, sounds from behind forced her to turn around. The scene she witnessed was the most horrific moment of her life. The first gunshot, mixed with the stadium's noise. Most people thought it was fireworks. But when the second, third, fourth gunshots came, the situation was understood. Gun, gun. Someone started shouting. Panic began. 30,000 people were trying to escape at the same time. There was a stampede in the stands. People were crushing each other. Screams, cries, shouts were filling the stadium. Vinnie Torino had finished his job. Patrick Sullivan had lost his life before his fiancée's eyes. But escape would not be so easy. Stadium police had immediately sprung into action. Detective Sergeant William Bill Morrison was one of the most experienced detectives of the Boston Police Department. He was a 40-year-old man with gray hair, steel blue eyes, and 20 years of police experience. He had come to watch the game with his family that day. When he heard the gunshots, he immediately took action. "Everyone stay calm," he shouted while pulling out his badge. "Police, clear the way." Morrison, with years of experience, made his way through the crowd to reach the crime scene. The scene he witnessed was the most brutal murder scene of his career. Patrick Sullivan was lying in a pool of blood with 5 bullet wounds. Next to him, Margaret Wellington, frozen in shock, was crying on her knees. "No one approach here," Morrison shouted. "This is a crime scene." However, the killers were still in the stadium. Vinnie Torino and his men were trying to disappear into the crowd. But Morrison's trained eye had spotted them. "Stop, police," Detective Morrison shouted. The members of the Gasoline Alley gang now began running without hiding. As they headed toward the stadium's exit gates, Morrison and other officers were chasing them. When Frank O'Malley reached the stadium's east exit, he encountered 3 police officers blocking his way. He drew his gun and fired. One police officer was wounded in the leg, but the other officers returned fire. Frank O'Malley lost his life at the entrance of Harvard Stadium, before the eyes of thousands of spectators. Tony Marcello managed to escape through the west exit. He disappeared into the streets. But 2 hours later, he was caught at his home in North End. Mike Torino hid in the crowd inside the stadium. He waited until the game was over, then tried to leave like normal spectators. But identity checks were being conducted at the exit gate. When he was caught, the still-smoking gun was found on him. Vinnie Torino, being the most experienced, was caught last. He managed to escape through the workers' entrance on the north side of the stadium, but Detective Morrison had followed him. After running breathlessly through Boston's narrow streets, he was cornered by the Charles River. "You have nowhere to run now, Vinnie," Morrison said, pointing his gun. Vinnie Torino dropped the gun in his hand to the ground. His 20-year criminal career had ended in the shadow of Harvard Stadium. After the incident, Margaret Wellington was taken to the hospital. She could not speak for 3 days due to shock and trauma. Witnessing her fiancé's murder had deeply affected the young woman's mental health. Her family decided to take her away from Boston. Margaret never watched a football game again after that incident. Harvard University administration faced a major scandal after Patrick Sullivan's death. When Sullivan's gang connections were revealed, the university's prestige was shaken. The rector announced that the incident would be investigated and necessary measures would be taken. Boston police solved the case with an intensive 3-day investigation. Vinnie Torino was tried for first-degree murder and sentenced to the electric chair. His brother Mike Torino received a 15-year prison sentence. Tony Marcello served 12 years in prison for murder. Detective Morrison, despite solving the case, remained affected by what he experienced. "I had never seen anything like this in my 20 years of police work," he told reporters. "Such brutality occurring in a place where innocent people come for entertainment is unacceptable." The incident made headlines in Boston newspapers for days. Headlines like "Massacre at Harvard Stadium," "High Society's Bloody Game," "Mob Terror at Harvard" were featured. The gang wars brought by the Prohibition era were no longer just a problem of the streets, but had become a threat affecting every segment of society. The dissolution of the Gasoline Alley Gang changed the balance of gang wars in Boston. Other gangs fought to take over the vacant territories. Violence increased even more. Harvard-Yale football games were never the same after that incident. Security measures were increased. Spectators began to be passed through metal detectors. The age of innocence in American university sports had ended on November 22, 1924, at Harvard Stadium. Margaret Wellington, 6 months after the incident, married someone else under her family's pressure. But she never had children. She spent the rest of her life in the shadow of that terrible day. When she died at 80, she had written in her will, "I want to be buried next to my fiancé Patrick." Vinnie Torino, before going to the electric chair, wrote a letter on his last night in prison. "I will die today, but I am not sorry. I avenged my brothers. This is the rule of our world, but I am sorry for the innocent people at that game. They were not part of this war." This incident that occurred in the autumn of 1924 went down in history as one of the most striking examples of the Prohibition era, because it showed that gang violence was no longer just a problem of the streets, but a reality threatening every segment of society. This event is a perfect example of the deep social contradiction experienced in 1920s America. On one side, high society playing the game of gentlemen at Harvard Stadium. On the other side, the ruthless realities of the underground world created by Prohibition. Patrick Sullivan's story is the tragic result of the double life that many young Americans lived during that period.
Perhaps the most bitter truth is that completely innocent people like Margaret Wellington had their lives ruined because of this violence. History sometimes teaches its most bitter lessons in the most unexpected places.